Welcome to the House 94 podcast. Thanks for joining today. This week, our topic is Second Amendment, the Second Amendment. If you tuned into some of our previous episodes, we've already covered some amazing content. We had Black mental health, we had civil rights, two really good topics. But today, we get into the Second Amendment, which is something that's always top of mind in our political environment, and it tends to separate left and right. And, you know, with all the things that are going on lately, you know, we had the militia group that came out in Michigan because they were upset about the shelter-in-place order from the governor out brandishing AK-47s and AR-15s. We had, you know, all kinds of other groups, you know, displaying their weapons. We've had several situations that have happened in the news. And then this past weekend, we got a group of brothers that decided to get together, get their AR-15s out and march on Stone Mountain. So we felt like it was a timely topic, something to put out here and then have a spirited discussion today. And obviously we're going to use we're going to lean on the legal scholars in our group to kind of set the stage for us. But, you know, we're going to have a general conversation on Second Amendment and see if we can add some color to the conversation. So all of that being said, and again, forgive me for the sunglasses. I'm not trying to be on the Hollywood shit, but here in Wakanda, the sun is coming off the lake. So please forgive me. Now, let's jump right in. Lou, kick it off, brother.
It's written because of slavery, the way it's written. It was ratified in 1791. And just to give you some history, the Constitution hadn't yet been ratified. And it was down to a handful of states that could ratify it, Virginia being one of them. And the governor of Virginia, Patrick Henry, had concern about the Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which provided for Congress to raise a militia. And he was concerned that Congress may do so and prohibit or try to restrain, stop, halt, whatever, the South from recovering runaway slaves and or putting a stop to slavery as a whole. So in order to address his governor's concern and try not to offend the other states that had already, the northern states, he wrote a simple one-sentence amendment, and it reads: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So what has happened is that simple one sentence has been dissected basically into two parts or two phrases. The first being a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state.
And the second part is shall not be infringed.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So, as we know in the United States, it doesn't really matter what the individuals think. It always comes down to the Supreme Court rulings. And as we get through the history of it, we'll see that the Supreme Court with different courts have ruled differently on the Second Amendment. But also, it's important to realize that when James Madison drafted that simple sentence, the intent was that blacks would not be able to bear arms. They didn't. That
was written or that was implied?
Well, that was their intent. It's not in the amendment, but that was his intent. Because
we were 3/5 humans, we weren't privy to the laws of the land, basically.
And then
subjects of the land.
And when you take it further, they put further restrictions based on what he had written, that the state had the right to raise a well-regulated militia. Blacks weren't allowed in the militia. Otherwise, they would have been able to bear arms. The only way to join the militia was to be a bugler or a drummer. So That's all they were allowed to do in the militia.
But it's funny because like I always had a misconception about the Second Amendment because I always believed. Now, of course, I'm not a student of history, because I believe your major was history, right?
It was something like that.
Yeah, I'm not a student of history. I mean, I know history as a learned individual, but I always thought that they created the Second Amendment so that when it was time to go down and fight the British at the river or at the at the border or whatever, that every man could go get his musket from under his bed, run down to the border and be ready to fight. That's actually not the case. They raised an army, and they were saying that the federal government should only be able to raise that army in that instance, but the militias should be maintained in the states for any oppression that went on in the states. Back to what Crump talked about when we had this discussion before, it was really about the states' rights, like they argued. It actually falls into the argument that some of the Second Amendment proponents talk about today.
So we got to understand the history, guys, understanding the history of what occurred with, and when I talk about history, pre-Revolutionary War, we're talking about the British, they were essentially coming in, staying in people's houses, pimping them on taxes, essentially coming in their houses, unreasonable, searching and seizing things that, that they believe may have been outlay for an uprising against them or what have you. And so, the whole revolution, starting with the Boston Tea Party, was kind of this, hey, we're not trying to get taxed by these folks. You're sitting here pimping us all the time. We're trying to rebel. And so
the collective, fuck all that.
Right. And exactly. And so they essentially was like, hey, they had their own little Black Lives Matter protests in that regard. And they were saying, we're just not having it anymore. And so once the Revolutionary War concluded, you had a situation where the colonists or those who were colonized, those, before the states had become, those first 13 original states, they basically decided, hey, we got to make sure that doesn't happen again. You know what I'm saying? We got to make sure that, that there is no sense that the federal government or the government can come over and impose their will upon us. And so in order to do that, we have to provide some type of ability for our people to, keep necessary arms to prevent or to ensure that, they are protected and that, those folks can't, just come in their house. Those redcoats can't come and impose their will. And so, so we got to look at it from that perspective. Is really they were trying to prevent imposition of this outside force from coming in. And so one of the things they did with James Madison, he was like, look, there was this, I guess there was actually this it's kind of like this ideology. You had the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. And essentially the Federalists believe that there should be government intervention. You don't need to have people, we can have a standing army. We don't have to worry about it or what have you. And then the Anti-Federalists was like, nah, we can't have that. And so essentially it got to a point where, James Madison was able to prevail ability with the other states. I guess he got the other states to be able to ratify and impose those first Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. He basically was able to put that out there in that Second Amendment. And so that the issue now becomes, you fast forward it, is whether or not there is an individual right to bear arms versus a collective right to raise a militia for the purpose of bearing arms, to essentially repel any invading force, to ensure that there's no insurrection within the government or within, the people. And when I say insurrection, I think we all know what that means. And, and so essentially that's where we are today. And so you've got these two sides kind of battling out as to what, those two parts of the Second Amendment are. And those two parts being, the right to bear arms, and the other part being that, the state shall pass no law that shall infringe upon that right. And so, to this day, you got these two issues. And so it really comes down to a matter of interpretation. How are you going to decide which one is which? And of course, the progressives have taken the side that it's all about, raising the right to bear arms is directly related to, raising and funding a militia, or, in this case, whether it be, the ability to, I can't really say National Guard, but the ability to be a soldier or to help repel an invading force, as it related to back in the day, to where the Republicans are pretty much saying, no, it's an individual right. And it basically goes to the individual's own right to bear arms for whatever purpose, as long as that purpose is lawful.
Yeah, I read something about that today, actually, kind of doing a prep for the show. And, like you were saying, one school of thought is that state regulated militia is actually supposed to be the National Guard. And you don't really need to have people, with their own firearms. And the other side of the argument is, nah, dude, if I want a rocket launcher under my bed, I can have a rocket launcher under my bed because I go eat and hunt and cull the numbers of the deer out there in the wilderness. Whatever you want to do, scorch the earth, whatever, it should be all good because you got the right to bear arms. So you think about the foundation that you guys just covered, right? And that takes us back to, the time when this was all written, ratified, all of that. You go through like this civil rights era, and that was mostly hand-to-hand combat, fire hoses and dogs and all of that. But then you get to the 70s, you got the war on crime, you get to 80s and the war on drugs, and now you've got this pervasive gun culture, both on the criminal side and on, every other side, right? And now with the gun manufacturers and everybody else, it's like guns everywhere. Take a little bit further to the assassination of Reagan. You got the Brady Bill that came about, infringing on the gun rights and that kind of thing. So can y'all talk a little bit about how the Supreme Court has gotten into this and like some of the legalities and how some of those things have helped to frame this argument?
Well, just to go off, the last Supreme Court decision occurred back in 2008, and it was actually a local.
It was Heller?
Huh? Yeah, it was the Heller decision.
Heller? Yeah.
Yeah, it was the District of Columbia v. Heller that occurred in 2008, and it still goes back to everything we just discussed, James Madison, arguments, all that. And essentially, just to give you a foundation of what that case was about, it was essentially a special police officer in DC who wanted to be able to get a handgun, purchase a handgun for personal use and bring it back to his house for home defense or whatever. Well, DC has always had a ban on handguns, and essentially, not only do they have a ban, if you had one prior to the point where they initiated the ban, it had to be locked up, or not necessarily locked up, but it had to be in your house. It couldn't be loaded, or it had to have what you call one of those lock and keys, so that it couldn't necessarily be used. The lock and key had to be on the trigger.
But what's the point?
And exactly. And then not only that, you had to, the District of Columbia government was basically issuing out a license, 1-year licenses, And so if you had that handgun, you had to essentially apply for this license every 1 year to essentially be lawful, to own it legally. And so, and then there was another issue, I believe, where it was it was illegal to have a registered handgun. So basically, a libertarian lawyer came about and filed a lawsuit, and it ended up getting dismissed initially, but then on appeal, they basically took it all the way up from the U.S. Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court, and basically was able to get that handgun ban overturned, whereby, because the court was basically, Justice Scalia, in his opinion, basically was like, essentially, the right to bear arms is an individual right, and essentially you're putting so much, you're essentially having this guy go through so much in order to own a weapon that it's tantamount to, abridging his freedom, and is an unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional in the way in which DC government is doing it. And so, but the dissent, which came from Justice Stevens, basically was like, it comes down to, although we understand that, but if we look at the Constitution goes back to what is it, that, the main argument was, it's a collective. You have to be able to collectively, it's not an individual right, it's a collective right. To go back to your argument is that, with all the things that have occurred in the 70s, 80s, the war on crime or whatever, essentially the way the Supreme Court looks at it is all that is said and done, all that is fine, all the war on crime, when you have all these killings or what have you, regardless of what has occurred, their belief is that, hey, there are things that the states can do to regulate it, however, they cannot totally ban the usage of these weapons because that is a total banishment or a total abolition or a total wipeout of the Second Amendment. And so they're basically saying, I don't care. I don't care about all this stuff that is happening, whether it be crime. I don't care about, all these crazy shootings that are going on all over the country with people wiping out kids, whatever. At the end of the day, our Second Amendment is what it is. And that's really raises the point. My last point in this is that, the Second Amendment and the Constitution does lean itself to be amended through ratification. And the way the Second Amendment is right now is it's just totally out of date. Because when you got two people, two different ideologies that can give, substantive good interpretation of one, sentence, then we've got a problem. Because the only thing that matters is, what the makeup of the Supreme Court is to determine which way the gun laws are going to go. So if you
that's madness. That's madness. And like Chicago had a similar case. I think it was Chicago versus McDonald or McDonald versus Chicago, where the black man in the South suburbs, he was saying crime is so bad, law-abiding citizens should be able to have a gun. But Chicago had similar gun laws to DC, where it was absolutely not allowed to have a firearm at all. And the Supreme Court ruled with him, which is funny because now it seems they have no support for black people owning guns and owning firearms. Let's talk about a little bit about how, even though the NRA is huge and they're proponents of bearing arms and all of that, until it comes to us.
In preparing for this, man, I was reading about, I'm all about the Black Panther Party. So what happened, I was reading in 1967, we all know the NRA is all about, you're taking my guns, But when Huey Newton and Bobby Seale and 28 other guys, they rolled up on Ronald Reagan at the Capitol building in Sacramento. They changed the laws immediately, and the NRA was behind it. Look it up, the Mulford Act. I was reading about that today. That's why California has some of the toughest gun laws now.
You won't see some gun laws enacted. You said have some black people getting some guns out.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that?
To my next point, they don't. They all about them having guns, but once they see us with guns, it's a problem. So they passed that law. I think it happened in like April. They signed it into law in like July. It's called the Mulford Act, man. Check
and what year was that? You remember?
1967.
1967.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about that is, and we talked about this before, is that the NRA has been around for a while. Before it got into politics and became one of the largest lobbying organizations in the world, basically. They were simply just a marksman type organization. They were open to African American
gun safety and all that.
They were all about gun safety, all about competitions, all about just general marksmanship and how to be a competing gun owner and a safe gun owner or whatever. It wasn't probably until the 60s and the riots and all that stuff that
Dirty Harry. Don't forget Dirty Harry.
Yeah. Well, no, that's right. That came around in the 70s and 80s. But it's interesting. I was going to take it back to the 80s. But now that what McLeod was saying about, how they changed their tune in 1967, essentially, I have reason to believe that has probably a lot to do with that time period and the fact that you said before, once black folks started saying, hey, enough is enough, and we're going to start bearing arms too, then their whole position changed. And, You know, part of that came into fruition with the with all those Dirty Harry and Charles Bronson movies.
Charles Bronson.
You know,
Death Wish.
Yeah, where we're gonna eliminate the thugs, we're gonna kill all these people in these poor black and brown communities in New York, the Bronx, and all that. And that's when their whole political ideology just kind of reframed itself, though. You know. And
I guess with all the money being generated by that lobbying organization, NRA was making money hand over fist. The Republican Party started getting paid by it, and I think they just started feeding each other. And they kind of took the whole gun owner out of it. I don't even think the NRA is about the membership anymore. It's really about the gun manufacturers and lobbying, and just that money wheel just kind of cycling through Washington.
Yeah, I think so too. That's a good point. I think the majority of it.
What do you guys think about the militia that rode up on Stone Mountain this weekend? What y'all think about that?
I think they'd be safer in Chicago than in Georgia, but you know, I mean, down there they got a lot of good old boys who can come out from under them rocks, and they got guns everywhere. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But the population in Georgia may not support that. They might get stuffed out. But I mean, hey, I like that show of force. I like how they were saying, you know what, we got guns too. I think that's important. It's just we just need to make sure that we sending the right messages and we actually doing something. You know what I'm saying? Like I want to see them do some follow through. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Show up at the polling places and make sure that people get to vote and don't get intimidated and that kind of thing. The same kind of stuff that they do to us, you know?
Right.
Can't bring a firearm to a polling place.
You can sell them on the street.
You just can't. I think it's a distance. It's like
it's a distance.
Yeah, it's a distance as far as how far you.
Yeah, they bring them to the state capitol.
Yeah.
Let's frame the question instead of saying what do we think about it in that regard. What do we actually think about it today? Like, what do you think it should be, and how do we feel about it individually? You're saying we already covered the militia versus the individual, right? What do each of y'all think? You know what I'm saying? Quasi, what you got?
Kudos for the history, because I think when everyone, or generally speaking, hears Second Amendment, we just think the right to bear arms and don't necessarily understand the history behind it all and how we arrive at today. When I hear it in this simplistic view, I think we all have a responsibility as Americans, and probably more importantly as African Americans today, given the climate and what's going on, to bear arms. I think we all need to have protection in our home and need to equip ourselves, train ourselves to protect our home and our family. So for me, and again, in a very simplistic form of it all, the definition of the Second Amendment, I'm very much for what it means and our right to bear arms and protect.
I do agree, because I've always had a gun. And it's always been about protection. It ain't been about robbing nobody. Yeah. It's just basically been protection. And when we talk about, but then you flip side, what about those people that don't have guns, that just think guns is dangerous or don't even want to even attempt to go be around them? You know?
Well, I think that's the beauty of the Second Amendment, though. I mean, and the beauty of America, when you look at it from an idealistic standpoint, I mean, we as Americans have the right to choose. You know, you don't look. I had a conversation with my oldest son about it, and he's not in favor of guns at all. And I respect it. I'm like, look, you 19 years old, you had an innocence of the world that you're looking through. Those are the lens that you're seeing life through right now. I'm 47 going on 48. I've experienced things and seen things that are different, and that have me in the mindset now that's like, look, I'm too damn old to be fighting somebody if I have to protect and defend myself. The days of dancing around and knocking a dude out ain't happening no more. No. But if you come up in my crib unannounced, right?
Yeah.
Then you know, with my
right for the hole in the tree,
I plan to let a fool know.
I mean, that's
well, yeah. Your son being 19, you know what I'm saying? He can still scrap. Like you said, I'm 48, got bad knees, and my linebacker days are 35 years ago. So exactly. Come up on me now, it ain't gonna be no squaring up. That's what I'm trying to still carry right now.
Let me ask y'all this.
Put a hole in somebody.
Let me ask you this though, because we talk about that, and obviously, I think everybody is on the same page as far as home defense, right? You know, as far as being able to protect your family and all that. I think the issue becomes your right to go out and carry your weapon.
Yes.
You know, how what is your feelings about that?
You know what? I'll tell you about that real quick. So I live in a high rise, right? And since I moved from Atlanta to Wakanda, well, it wasn't Wakanda at first. I moved from Atlanta to Chicago. I was living downtown in a high rise. Then I moved to Wakanda, Hyde Park on the lake. So in a high rise, you don't have as many crime issues because unless it's Spider-Man, they're not coming to my crib, right? We got all kind of security downstairs, locked doors, all that kind of stuff. However, there was a little bit of a crime spree lately, and I was like, man, I think me and the wife need to go and get a concealed carry. The economy like it is, and people going crazy and just, in need of things and willing to do anything to feed their family, they might, try to take their shortcut. You want to be the wrong one they run up on. So I think it's important to get that concealed carry and to, in this day and age, I mean, I always felt like, Second Amendment was bullshit, but considering where we are now, if everybody has a gun, you almost got to get a gun to be on the same page and be on par with everybody else. All right, cool. Okay, you a gun toter or you a police caller? You trying to be strapped or you what? What's up?
I'm actually both, man. I believe you got to have both. You know what I mean? I mean, especially this was a good topic, and as I started kind of doing the research, looking back, like the NRA, like we said before, was strong about gun rights until Black Panther came along, and especially in light of what's going on right now with the economy, we see a lot of tensions in the air. It's just better to be prepared, safe than sorry. So I'm a big proponent of you got to stay strapped.
Now, all that being, JT, what's your take? I mean, I know you living off in where are you? Schenectady.
Money earning Mount Vernon.
Come down, exactly. So the gun laws in New York are, just as tough as they are in California for the most part, particularly around handguns. But in Westchester, you can have a shotgun or a rifle. That's acceptable. And then if you have a urgent need where either you have a cash business or something that says that your life is being in a jeopardy situation, then you can get a handgun permit. But those are hard to come by. Right. My thing is that you got to make sure that people are aware of the laws. You got to focus on gun safety. You got to make sure the restrictions around people that have mental issues, people that have been accused or convicted of domestic abuse.
I feel you, but the funny thing, and this is where this is a perfect lead into the next part of the conversation. You talk about gun rights and having your own concealed carry or having a weapon in your house for protection. That leads us into the discussion about some of the ways that this is going wrong for Black people, right? So you think about Philando Castile, for example, up in Minnesota. He was a legal gun owner. He had a concealed carry permit. He got pulled over. He informed the police officers that he had a weapon, and they panicked and were like, let me see your hands. Instead of him put his hands up, he said, no, I got a permit. Let me show you. Let me see your hands. A man reached for his permit. They shot him and killed him on the spot. And then the other crazy one that happened is the girl in Louisville. Is Breonna Taylor?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I get her name right. They come and do a no-knock warrant in Louisville. I mean, this ain't Compton in the 80s, you know what I'm saying? Louisville for a no-knock warrant. And basically in Kentucky now, where they got like castle doctrine and all kind of stuff in place, and they barge these people's houses unannounced in a place where people can be armed. They shoot at the police, they shoot back and kill the girl, and it's like, kill the lady. And it's like, So to me, that's an outrage. That's kind of thing that the NRA and everybody else ought to be up in arms about. But for us, it's kind of like they leave us hanging.
Well, I think that leads to a good point, because you got to understand that these laws are not written for us.